PokeClass is sponsored by CollectorsCash.com, who now have your new set Next Destinies in stock at amazing prices. Get your boxes, sealed products and single cards like Mewtwo EX for the most competitive prices around, as well as all of your current format goodies within easy reach. If you're looking to stock up on anything Pokemon or any other card game for that matter, then head over to CollectorsCash.com after the show. Playing conservatively is always good practice in Pokemon, but with the format changing to a much faster, I'm going to hit you for 80 damage on the first turn kind of attitude, you would have thought that playing a very reactive deck would struggle somewhat. However, with States competition running high at the moment, we've seen yet another new deck come to light, and it features Terrakion and, well, just Terrakion. Retaliate and Land Crush are the only phrases you'll need to learn with this deck, so if this sounds like your cup of tea, or you want to know what on earth I'm all about, then stay tuned as I'm going to be analysing Terrakion, a deck that has been smashing through the States competition. Welcome to episode 65 of PokeClass, where you're going to be looking at a deck that has sprung to life through the newest set and goes hand in hand with the majority of competitive players playing Zekrom Eels at the moment. Most people play Zekrom with no fear of having a deck that is completely weak to fighting, since all that's out there is Donphan, which doesn't have great matchups elsewhere, and the Pokemon we're going to be talking about today, which need to suffer a KO to do decent levels of damage. However, this newly created mono fighting deck has been tried and tested in a competitive environment, taking in various top cut spots and even winning a couple of events too. The deck is incredibly cheap to make, probably due to the lack of Mewtwo, but it's still incredibly competitive if you don't feel like playing Durant. So let's take a quick look at the skeleton list and see what this deck is all about. And basically, Terrakion is all that this deck is about. If you thought that Durant had a low count of Pokemon, then this one goes one better by having just 4 Terrakion in the Pokemon section of the list. The good thing about this is that it's almost impossible for you to get donked, and you don't have a bad starter because they're all the same, and you have a ton of space for taking as many trainers as you like. But before we get to the rest of the list, what we need to take a look at is what Terrakion is going to be good for. Basically, you're going to be taking advantage of people playing mono-electric type decks by being able to one-hit KO every single Pokemon in their deck with either Retaliate, which hits for 90 damage for 2 energy when suffering a KO the previous turn, or Land Crush, which does a simple 90 for 3 energy. Either of these attacks will whip through any Zekrom, Electric, Dynamo, Zekrom EX, and the list goes on, which makes you Eels matchup incredibly strong as expected. Sitting at a still large 130 HP makes it hard to take KOs on this huge ball, and that is pretty much what you're aiming for when playing this deck, streaming powered up Terrakion through the help of your trainers and hitting hard for the rest of the game. However, Terrakion does have some issues, which I'll address later with ways to cover them up, but first, let's look at what you can do with the rest of the list, the part that you can have the most fun with. Since you only have 4 Pokemon in the entire list, you have a lot of space you can dedicate to various trainers and consistency cards to make sure that you can keep hitting for as long as possible. Draw power is where we'll start first, and the best form of straight draw out there at the moment is Professor Juniper, discarding what you don't need in favour of giving you 7 fresh new cards to carry on messing with your opponent. Running 4 of these just gives you what you need to zip through your deck as quickly as possible, since you obviously don't have any support when it comes to Pokemon. You've also got yourself 4N, which gives you the upper hand when it comes to the late game. Carrying those Terrakions one after the other is going to take a lot of resources for any standard Zekrom Eels build, so when it comes to the late game and they've been able to keep up on prizes so far, you can end them to a small amount of cards and carry on hitting out. This is an incredibly effective way to snap up a win when your opponent has been able to keep up in the prize exchange, and wins you games when you may have been harder to pull off if you hadn't disrupted them in the first place. And your last draw supporter comes in the form of good old Professor Oak, who just gives you that consistent form of draw when you need it throughout the game. Nothing out of the ordinary really. For the decks that lack other form of draw when it comes to Pokemon, this one, even lacking Cleffa, you're going to need a high amount of straight draw power which Pond gives you every single time. The last card in your supporter section is Black Belt, which isn't really seen much anymore since you don't need to be able to break certain damage barriers like when Train Lock was a problem last format. However, coming back to the point that you only have 1 Pokemon, just 4 of them in this list, you're going to need to significantly boost the damage output of Terrakion every once in a while, probably when you come across those Mewtwo. This card, paired with plus power, can tip KOs into your favour that aren't already covered by double fighting weakness, and keep you getting those prizes every single turn of the game. The main synergy between this card and Terrakion is that you want to be falling behind in prizes anyway, so you can retaliate your opponent for massive amounts of damage, so being able to use this card in a situation you would like to be in anyway is just a bonus. Onto your trainers now, and we'll start off with the most important trainer that makes this deck really work, Experience Share. This card was severely overlooked when Next Destinies was released, until now, and has created this very deck. This is one of the newest Pokemon tool cards, which must be attached to a Pokemon, and when a Pokemon in the active position gets knocked out, you can move a basic energy from the just knocked out Pokemon to the Pokemon with Experience Share attached. If you haven't seen this synergy yet, it is the small form of energy acceleration that this deck needs to keep streaming those Terrakion. By having a Terrakion knocked out, you're able to move an energy to a bench Terrakion with Experience Share, promote that very Pokemon attached from your hand, and then use Retaliate for at least 90 damage on the next turn. Being able to set up a 90 damage strong attack in just a single turn is what keeps this deck going throughout the game, and it's all because of this one card. This is all the synergy the deck needs to keep up with its strategy, hitting every single turn. Up next is Heavy Ball, a card that was also slightly overlooked in Next Destinies, and it's basically your sole form of search from the deck. You only have 4 Pokemon, so drawing into them isn't going to happen as often as you like, so including this card, make sure that you can fish out those hefty 4 retreat Terrakion whenever you need them, by using them normally or via Junk Arm later on. A possibly strange inclusion to the list is Loss Remover, a card that everyone would love to run but just can't fit it in, and that is the beauty of having so much space in this deck. As you run so little Pokemon, you have a lot of space to fit in these tech cards that are going to give you the edge in certain matchups. This particular card is because almost every competitive deck is either running 4 double colourless or are running high amounts of Prism and or Rainbow energy to try and make their decks as flexible as possible. However, this relatively high count of Loss Remover is going to keep putting your opponent behind on attachments, specifically in the CMT matchup, and give you the chance to 2-hit KO Pokemon like Tornadus while stopping them 2-hit KOing you. And the last card not seen in all lists is Revive, and the reason for this is incredibly simple. You only run basic Pokemon. I know it's a recurring point, but all of these trainers need to support your 4 Pokemon, since your opponent does need to take 6 prizes, and you need to have the resources there to recover your 4 Pokemon enough to not get benched in the process of the game. These 2 Revive could be bumped up to 3 if you don't want to include Super Rod, also in this list, since you'll need a lot of recovery when your opponent can keep up with your Retaliate exchanges, and I wouldn't go any less than 2. And the rest of the trainers are pretty standard inclusions in any list at the moment. Max amount of catchers, make sure that you can pick your targets for Retaliation. 3 Junk Arm, make sure that you can reuse your resources when you hit the late game. Plus power is to tip those high damage attacks into crucial KOs when needed. At least 2 Switch, make sure that you can move your Terrakion around when your opponent catches the ones without energy. And Super Rod is to make sure that you have that extra form of recovery to work with when Heavy Ball and Revives just aren't enough. On to your last part of the list, which is Energy, and you have a simple 12 fighting in here, which seems to be the right amount to draw into with all of your draw supporters, and you shouldn't need any more than this because you plan to be keeping energy on your field with Experience Share. And there you have the skeleton list for this actually fairly simply built deck. But you do have 6 spaces free here, so here are a couple of options you should consider if you want to take this deck for a spin. The first option I would consider is Crushing Hammer, a card that goes hand in hand with Loss Remover in slowing your opponent down and making sure they can't respond to KO your balls too frequently. Targeting key energy drops in the early game with this very card makes sure that your opponent's setup is as slow as yours, since you won't be doing much in the first 2 turns or so. Flipping heads just once on this card will put you ahead of the game by a single turn and can tip the tide of very close games, and don't forget, it can also target special energy too. The next option you have is Defender, a card we don't see anymore because of Eviolite, but since you can't use more than 1 tool at a time on a Pokemon, you need another way to sponge damage if you want your Terrakions to last a bit longer. Sitting at 130 HP means they won't be one-shotted often, but if you want even more damage to sponge at crucial moments in the game, then play this card since it can catch an opponent off guard and possibly make them miss a crucial prize in the exchange. The last card in terms of trainers that you can include in here is as simple as Pokegear. As mentioned numerous times in this episode, you have a ton of space in here to go crazy with your trainers, so why not add those in that give you even more consistency. Consistency is big when it comes to tournaments like States, and with the amount of draw supporters you have in here, you may not seem to run dry, but even just one of these will always give you that boost you need to fish out supporter when your hand isn't so hot. And then we come on to variants of the deck you can run, and a popular one at the moment is one including Landorus. Landorus is designed to give you a much stabler game against anything that isn't lightning type, even though it can still run through those Ezekiels very nicely. It has a built-in way of attaching energy with Abundant Harvest, and can attack for 80 on the second turn when paired with this, and spreading damage around at the opponent's board at the same time. This has become a lot more stable version of the original deck, and I actually think it can fit well in the metagame, even if it doesn't hit any lightning decks in the process of a tournament. Mewtwo is probably your main concern when it comes to straight Terrakion, as it does run through them fairly well, but throwing in 2 of your own gives you enough fight against that powerful purple clone. Being able to throw down your own Mewtwo and attach experience share puts your opponent in a position where they don't really want to go offensive with their own Mewtwo, since you'll be able to move your energy and return a KO with your own. Of course, all of these inclusions will force some trainer changes, such as switching out heavy balls for dual balls, since Landorus only has 1 retreat cost, but it is a very solid deck concept that I'm sure we'll see more of in the run up to Nationals. And that is the lowdown on the straight Terrakion deck, along with some unique spins you can put on it yourself, and some extra Pokemon you can throw in there to make it a more well-rounded deck. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you did, please leave a like in the bottom left hand corner to see if we can hit the like target this week. Thanks for being patient in terms of videos up until now, but I should be back on track, and I hope you enjoy all of the PTCGO games, Let's Play episodes and new videos to be released in the near future. Thanks for all your support as always, and I'll see you all next week.